Greetings from love, lies, and deception. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. My name is Laura, and I'm going to share with you a story that completely changed my life. It started as a routine vacation at my husband's family's beach house, but something happened there that I could never have predicted. The events that transpired over the course of those few days completely upended my understanding of loyalty, love, and myself. This is a story of passion, temptation, and difficult decisions we had to make. Please stay with me through the end of this story, as its conclusion will astound you. I've been married to John for 6 years, and our marriage has always been stable without major upheavals or conflicts. JN is a trustworthy person, and I always felt fortunate to have found such a partner. But one day, everything changed. I was a little nervous when John proposed that we go to his family's beach house in South Carolina for our vacation because his father, Mark, always seemed cold and distant to me. Nevertheless, John reassured me that the trip would be pleasant and peaceful because he had many childhood memories associated with this place. We left early on Friday morning, and as we drove there, Jan tried to keep me entertained by telling me stories about his own childhood. He talked about how he and Mark would go fishing, build sandcastles, and spend a night out. When we finally arrived, I was struck by the place's beauty. The beach house was perched on a small cliff with a breathtaking view of the ocean. Mark met us there, and to my surprise, he greeted me with a warm embrace. Mark was a tall, well-built man with an impressive physique. His hair was starting to gray, which only added to his charm. He was fit and energetic, which was immediately noticeable that evening having dinner together on the terrace. I began to see him not just as a strict businessman, but as a person with a rich inner world. He shared stories about his travels and how he had built the house with his own hands. I began to understand why Jan was so proud of his father the next day. John received a call from work. It turned out that there were some issues that required his immediate attention. He apologized and said he needed to leave for the day, but would be back by evening. I felt a slight anxiety being alone with Mark, but he immediately suggested we spend the day together and that he would show me the surroundings. We started with a walk on the beach. Mark showed me his favorite spot, a small, secluded cove hidden from prying eyes. He told me how he often came there to think or just enjoy the peace and quiet. We sat on the sand and talked about everything under the sun. Mark shared stories about his past, his dreams, and hopes. At some point, I found myself thinking that I really enjoyed his company. After lunch, Mark suggested we go for a bike ride. We cycled along narrow paths, enjoying the fresh sea breeze and the sun. I felt like a teenager on summer vacation. We laughed, joked, and challenged each other to races. By the time we returned home, it was late. We were tired but happy. Mark suggested we have some wine on the terrace and watch the sunset. I agreed. Feeling that this day was one of the best of my life, we sat side by side on the swing, watching the sun slowly dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bright shades of red and orange. Mark appeared to enjoy every second of the night. Eventually, he laid his hand on the back of my chair and lightly touched me. I shivered a little at the warmth and strength of his hand. He started talking about how much he loved these quiet evenings. I noticed a hint of sadness in his voice and asked why he seemed so melancholy. Mark sighed and told me how much time he spent alone after his wife passed away. I could see how much he missed having someone to talk to, and our conversations became more intimate as we shared our deepest thoughts and feelings. At one point, he put his arm around my shoulders, and I felt his closeness start to excite me. When the sunset finally vanished over the horizon, we went back inside. Mark made dinner, and we sat on the terrace again, this time under the moonlight. He poured us more wine, and I felt the atmosphere between us grow even more intense. He looked at me with such warmth and tenderness that I couldn't take my eyes off him. Finally, Mark stood up and extended his hand to walk me to my room. The warmth of his hand moved to me as I grasped it. My heart began to beat more quickly as we moved slowly down the hallway. I understood then that a deeper bond than friendship was developing between us. He paused when we got to my room and met my eyes. "Laura," he said, "I want you to know that you are an amazing woman." His words had a profound effect on me. "I'm grateful, Mark," I said. "I really appreciate your company, too." My face flushed as we stood in the hallway for what seemed like an eternity, and I felt a spark ignite between us. He leaned in and kissed my cheek tenderly and unexpectedly, and I couldn't help but smile. "Good night, Lord Laura," he whispered as he stepped back. "Good night, Mark," I replied. I went into my room and closed the door behind me. My heart was still racing, and I knew that this day had changed something important in my life. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, wondering what would happen the following morning when John left to take care of his work. Mark suggested that we spend another day together, and he mentioned a great skate park nearby where we could go roller skating. I was hesitant because I wasn't very good at it, but Mark assured me he would teach me without any issues. I wore my favorite short skirt and a tight top that accentuated my figure. I wanted to feel confident and attractive when I came downstairs. Mark looked at me and nodded approvingly. His eyes gleamed, and I felt a slight thrill. We arrived at the skate park, and Mark began showing me the basic movements. He was patient and caring, constantly encouraging me. Despite my efforts, I still felt unsure on the skates and often lost my balance. Mark held my hands, keeping me steady. At one point, when I was almost gliding confidently down the path, I suddenly felt myself losing control. Mark reacted instantly and caught me in his strong arms. I found myself pressed against his chest, his face very close to mine. I looked in his eyes and saw something that made my heart beat faster. He leaned in slightly and gently kissed me. His lips were warm and soft, and I felt everything around us disappear. My mind screamed that this was wrong, but my body responded to his kiss with unexpected passion. We stood there seemingly forever, lost in the moment. When we finally pulled away from each other, I saw the same desire in his eyes that I felt myself. "Laura, forgive me. I didn't mean to, but I can't stop," he said, still holding me in his arms. "Mark, I can't either," I replied, and our lips met again in a kiss, even more passionate and tender than before. And after roller skating, we returned home. We both knew something had changed between us. We sat in the kitchen, trying to act normally, but the tension in the air was palpable. Mark abruptly got up and approached me. He bent down carefully and gave me another kiss. I didn't even try to resist. His lips were so gentle and determined that I couldn't help but give. Mark began to slowly remove my skirt, his movements confident and precise. I felt his fingers glide over my skin, sending waves of goosebumps all over me. He then took off my top, leaving us both in our underwear. Mark stepped back for a moment and looked at me with such passion and admiration that I felt like the most desired woman in the world. He pulled me close and started kissing me again, slowly and deeply. His hands roamed over my body, explored every inch. I responded with equal passion, feeling my desires flare up anew. Mark lifted me onto the kitchen table, his hands continuing to explore my body while his lips never left mine. We moved in unison, forgetting everything except our desire for each other. In that moment, nothing else existed. We became one, our bodies and souls merging in a single surge of passion and love. When it was all over, we lay on the kitchen table, holding each other and trying to catch our breath. Mark gently kissed my forehead and whispered, "Laura, you are amazing." I smiled and snuggled closer to him. That moment changed everything, and I knew we still had many challenges ahead, but for now, I was happy and felt I had made the right choice. It had been a few days since Mark and I first allowed ourselves to succumb to our passion. Those days were filled with secret glances, fleeting touches, and hidden kisses. We both understood that our actions were dangerous and wrong, but it was impossible to resist. I made the decision to surprise Mark. I want something out of the ordinary, anything that would further stoke our flame. John was back at work on Saturday morning, so I went shopping to locate the ideal present. After visiting a few stores, I happened onto a tiny boutique that had an enticing selection of latex rabbit masks and costumes. They looked very hot. It was exactly what I was looking for. When I returned home, Mark was in the garden working on something. I quietly passed by him and went to my room to change. The latex costume clung tightly to my body, accentuating all my curves. I put on a mask and looked at myself in the mirror. Looked truly seductive. I went downstairs and found Mark in the kitchen. He looked at me, his eyes widening in surprise and admiration. "Laura, you look amazing," he whispered, approaching me, his hands immediately wrapped around my waist, and he pulled me close, and we began to kiss, passion overwhelming us with new intensity. Mark lifted me onto the kitchen table, as he had Done the first time, his lips trailed along my neck and his hands explored my body through the thin latex. I felt my desire growing with each of his touches. We started making love right there, forgetting about everything else in the world, and suddenly the kitchen door flew open. Jan walked in. He stopped in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. He stared at us, unable to believe what he was seeing. "What the hell is going on here?" he shouted. And Mark and I jumped apart. I grabbed the nearest towel to cover myself while Mark tried to explain, but John had already lunged at him. "Dad, how could you? How are you both able to harm me like this?" Anger and grief were in his voice. A fight started when John struck Mark. They fought back and forth while rolling on the ground. I yelled in an attempt to stop them, but it didn't work since they were too angry. At last, John shoved Mark aside and got to his feet, his face twisted in agony and dismay. "I don't ever want to see either of you again, ever," he said in a trembling voice. And then he turned and left, leaving us in ruins. I stood there, unsure of what to do, and Mark, who had bruises all over his face, came over and hugged me. "Laura," he said, "we need to talk, but not right now." I nodded, feeling the tears running down my cheeks. We were left alone, broken and devastated by what had happened, and his words reverberated in my head. We didn't realize that we had a long and difficult road ahead to deal with the consequences of our actions. But at that moment, we simply held each other, finding solace in the one thing we had left, our love, despite everything. A few days had passed since the terrible fight, and the house was now filled with silence and heavy gloom. Mark and I couldn't find peace in our thoughts, which kept returning to John's suffering and disappointment. We were aware that our behavior had destroyed our family's trust as well as his. I watched the waves softly lapping against the coast while I sat on the balcony. Mark, who still had scratches and bruises on his face, came over to me, sat down next to me, and grasped my hand. "I know we were wrong, Laura. I'm not sure whether we'll ever be able to make up for the betrayal of JN. Mark, I don't know how we move forward," he stated in a sorrowful tone. I replied, feeling tears welling up again, "But I know one thing. I can't keep living in this lie. We need to find a way to make amends." John Mark nodded. "I think we need to at least try to talk to him. Let's call him and apologize." We decided to call John. My heart pounded wildly as I dialed his number. On the third ring, he picked up. "Hello, John." I began, my voice trembling. "It's Laura, Mark, and I want to talk to you. You were so sorry for what happened." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Jay responded in a cold voice. "Laura, I don't care. I don't want to see or hear from you anymore. You both betrayed me, and I will never forgive that." My heart sank with pain. "John, please give us a chance to explain why." Mark tried to intervene. "No," John interrupted, "you no longer exist to me. I want nothing to do with you." And he hung up. I stared at the phone, unable to believe what had just happened. Mark hugged me, and we stood in silence, realizing the full extent of our betrayal. John had rejected us, and it was irreversible. We understood that our actions had inflicted a deep wound that John could not forgive. We had destroyed not only his trust, but also our family. This moment became a point of no return for us. The next few weeks passed in a dismal atmosphere. We tried to support each other, but our hearts were broken. We continued to live in the house, which now seemed empty and cold. One evening, while sitting on the veranda, Mark spoke to Laura. "We need to move forward. We can't change the past, but we could try to build a future." I looked at him and nodded. "You're right. We can't get John back, but we have to find a way to live with this." We decided to seek help from a family counselor to work through our feelings and find ways to cope with our guilt. These sessions helped us better understand ourselves and each other, and to develop a strategy for dealing with the consequences of our actions over time. We began to find solace in the small joys of life. We spent more time together trying to support each other. We knew that our path would not be easy, but we were ready to go through it together. Our relationship with Mark became even deeper and more sincere. We realized that our feelings for each other were not just the result of passion, but true love and affection. We began to build a new future full of hopes and plans. However, the shadow of our actions always lingered. We knew we could never fully escape the guilt and pain we had caused John, but we continued to live, striving to be better and learning from our mistakes. It had been several months since John severed all ties with us. Life slowly, but surely began to take a new direction, Mark, and I decided to sell the beach house and move to another place to start fresh. Our relationship grew stronger, and we learned to cherish every moment spent together. We moved to a small coastal town where no one knew about our past. There we bought a cozy house with an ocean view and began building a new life. Mark found a job at a local business, and I started organizing art exhibitions at the local gallery. Our days were filled with simple joys, walks on the beach, for evening dinners on the terrace, and meeting new friends. But despite the outward well-being, the thought of Jen never left us. We hoped that over time he would find it in himself to forgive us, even if it never happened. One evening, as Mark and I sat on the terrace watching the sunset, I felt the need to talk about our future, Mark. I began. We've been through a lot together. I know that our past will always be a part of us, but I believe we can find a way to live happily moving forward. He looked at me lovingly and nodded. Laura, I think so too. I want our future to be filled with happiness and love. We deserve a second chance. He hugged me and kissed my forehead. Laura, I'm happy too. I'm grateful for every day spent with you. We have built a new life, and I believe there are many happy moments ahead for us. We continued living, appreciating every moment. We understood that our mistakes would always be with us, but they did not have to define our future. We learned from them and grew stronger. Sometimes I thought about John. I hoped he had found his path and could find happiness. I knew he would never forgive us, but I wanted to believe he could move on and find his place in life. Our story was not perfect, but it was ours. We went through the darkness to find the light, and that journey made us who we are. We knew there were still many challenges ahead, but we were ready to face them together and sit on the terrace with Mark. I realized that our life, despite everything, was full of love and hope, and that is the most important thing.